What's up, everybody? Reed Wallach here on a Tuesday, joined as always by Cody Williams. This is Stacking the Box College Football Edition. Had a busy week 11. We had our first after the college football playoff reveal. We now live in this CFP laden world where we know the rankings. We had a busy week 11. We had Georgia go down. We had Alabama basically knock LSU out of the postseason. We had BYU maintain their undefeated season. We had Miami's undefeated season go up in flames. We had a lot going on. We have a lot to get to. We're going to give our two updated brackets. We're going to get you through the week 12 slate. We got a lot to do. Cody, what's going on, man?
I'm licking my wounds a little bit. You did chase me down. You have the lead now. I'll bring it up so you don't have to gloat too hard over it. But I've been not doing my best work recently, and you have chased me down. So I'm locked in today. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I wouldn't say chased you down. It's more that you just haven't been able to get up off the ground, as we're both under 500 on the year, but still with a half game difference here. So that might be the ultimate decider here. But our pick segment, we are into a dead heat here as we head down the home stretch of the college football season. Should we just get right into, I think let's use our updated bracket as a way to talk through what happened last week, and we could just get right into it with, here's my updated bracket right here. I have behind it last week, so we can follow the progression. I'm not going to lie, Cody. I struggled with this one because it was tough for me to kind of reason with what had happened last week and how to really factor it in and like where this is all going. So just a big picture overview without revealing the bracket for the two conference championship or for the two buys, so seats 3 and 4. It's not necessarily who I think is going to be there. I just went with like who the odds indicate would be the choice right now, if that makes sense. So I'm not saying that I'm going to be like correct, but that's at least how I went through this exercise, if that makes sense.
No, and I did the exact same thing. Like I kind of just looked at where I think the rankings will fall and who by that number and by the odds are going to be the projected champions. Again, I frankly have two different champions if I'm predicting the final bracket, but like as what I think it's going to be this week.
Exactly. And this isn't like the rankings themselves. We're doing the bracket side of things, where it will fall out, how it would look on the piece of paper, rather than who's ranked 1 through 12 necessarily. Because obviously two conference champions are in line to get that other bye. We'll see if Boise State could get into that mix or the G5 bid, but spoiler alert, I didn't go that way. So let's start with the 1 seed. I kept it as Oregon. Get a routine win against Maryland. Take care of business. No need to trip up here. Oregon controls their path to the 1 seed, in my opinion.
Oh, no, 100%. Like Oregon is as of right now, conference championships aside, like Oregon is in the most control of what's going to happen here. Like the SEC is in complete chaos after Georgia losing. Like who the hell knows what's going to happen there? The ACC is kind of in the same boat. Big 12, I don't think the ACC or the Big 12 have any remote shot, especially with Miami going down, of getting near the 1 seed. And the SEC would have to do a lot of work to get there. Like Texas would probably have to run the table, and Oregon would have to lose for it to even be a conversation.
Yeah, completely agree. So it seems like you tipped your hand there. For me, my number 2 seed last week, we went with Georgia. I moved Texas up after they blow out Florida, and obviously Georgia loses to Ole Miss on the road. To me, Texas, they leapfrog everybody. I had them last week as the 6 seed. I have them jumping all the way up just by not losing. And they are now the 2 seed for me.
Same here. It's Texas. And I think one of the things coming out of last week, like Florida is Florida right now, and they're coming off the Georgia game. So I don't want to read too much into it. But I think one of the big takeaways I had between both Texas and Alabama was how beneficial the bye weeks were to get their quarterbacks healthy. Quinn Ewers and Jalen Milroe looked like different players than what we had seen the past 2 or 3 games.
Yeah, I'm interested to see where you land with Alabama and Georgia, kind of 2 teams we hinted at there. So my 3 seed, not that I necessarily agree with it, but I kept Miami in the 3-hole. I
Ooh,
thought about
okay.
moving SMU all the way up, but for the sake that Miami is still in control of their own destiny to win the ACC, I made them the 3 seed. That's just kind of how this shook out for me. I don't necessarily think that's where this is going and it's deserving, but this is a complete hypothetical exercise. So this is how it ended up for me.
So I have BYU at the 3 seed just because I think they're going to be ranked higher than Miami, frankly. Like we saw in the first college football playoff rankings with where Miami came in, I believe at 4, like the committee was already a little dubious of the Hurricanes. Excuse me, a little dubious of the Hurricanes. And now that you have a loss to an unranked opponent on that resume, BYU doesn't have that loss. So I do think the committee is going to have BYU ahead of Miami.
So you have Miami at 4?
I do have Miami.
All right. Well, you kind of overlooked something because I told you I was just going by the odds of who's going to win each conference. The Colorado Buffaloes, coached by Deion Sanders, led by Heisman favorite Travis Hunter and future top 3 pick in the draft, Shedeur Sanders. They are the betting favorite to win the Big 12 now after they go on the road and take care of Texas Tech. Colorado is in control of their own destiny to win the Big 12, implying they would be favored over BYU on a neutral field. So my 4 seed in this week's exercise is actually Colorado.
Okay.
Look, man, there's different simulations of how the world plays out, and this simulation is everything coming up buff. So my 4 seed was Colorado, actually.
So I will say, when I mentioned the fact that I have 2 conference champions in here that are going to be projected by the rankings in here right now, I have Colorado. If I'm predicting the final playoff bracket, Colorado's playing like the best team in the Big 12 right now. And I don't think there's any question about that. And so, like, there's a reason the odds favor them because they look like the best team in the Big 12. So, like, if I'm projecting the final college football playoff bracket, I think the Buffs are in that spot.
Which is crazy. See how we've come. Colorado, they're a huge home favorite against Utah off of the loss in the Holy War, against BYU, who is a small home favorite against Kansas. Kansas playing some really good ball at the moment. We're going to talk about BYU, Kansas. But Colorado, schedule, again, I just mentioned, big favorite against Utah. They go on the road, I want to say it's at Arrowhead, to play Kansas, where they'll be small road favorite, pick 'em of sorts, depending maybe on what happens against BYU. And then they're home to play the corpse of Oklahoma State. So they went out. Colorado, it's shaping up like they're going to be favored in the Big 12 championship game. We'll see how this all plays out. But for me, my 4 seed was Colorado. Cody's was Miami. 5 seed, did you stick with Ohio State?
Yeah. I did, yeah. I mean, there's no reason to bump them down at this point. Like, they're not a conference champion projected right now, but, I mean, who's better than Ohio State among the at-large?
100%.
Right,
and this is where I think we start to see, you could start to get creative in how you're going to see these teams. So last week for me, 6 was Texas, but we moved them up into the bye spot for the SEC. So I went for this week. I made the 6 seed Indiana. I think, to me, given where the other teams are at, I think the committee should be respecting Indiana's undefeated record a little bit more. And as they head into a bye week, look, again, it's November 12th. So this ranking, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. So I think they should respect Indiana and bump them up to the 6th seed, in my opinion, and not give credit to a Georgia team that picked up their second loss, or overrate an Alabama team that had a really impressive win against LSU, but put some respect on Indiana's name. Still undefeated as we head into November.
No, 100%. We're in lockstep here because I have Indiana at 6 as well. We saw the AP Top 25 come out on Sunday, and Indiana vaulted all the way up to number 5. You know, granted, you know, the losses ahead of them in the rankings helped them, but like, I do think that it also says something. We know Michigan's not what Michigan was last year or anything close to that. But at the same time, one of the big questions about Indiana, it was a question going into the Nebraska game, it was a question going into this game, was when you get up against like NFL caliber athletes like your Mason Grahams and your Kenneth Grants, what's Indiana going to look like? And I do think Indiana turtled up a little bit in that game, but they also controlled the game for the most part. And so, like, I think the fact that you were still able to get that win, that's going to sway the committee to give Indiana a little bit more respect than they were getting last week.
For me, So I put Georgia at 7.
Ooh, okay.
I thought about dropping them further. I didn't know how far to put them because yes, they lost at Ole Miss. Yes, it is their second loss. Yes, they were expected to win that game. They were a small favorite, but isn't this like the world they're gonna like? It's if they lose another game, like they lose to Tennessee this weekend or something, then you drop them out of the whole thing. I don't think you drop them from 2 all the way down to out of the playoffs. So I look at who else is on, like is behind them. I just thought this was the right place for them. So I ended up stopping the slide for Georgia at number 7. I think that's somewhat controversial though.
That is controversial because I'll go ahead and spoil this for you. Georgia's my first team out. I do not have
Okay.
Georgia in the 12-team field. And they're a victim of bid stealing because I think Boise State, who was ranked 12, so they weren't a bid stealer in the first college football playoff rankings, I think they dropped to 13 or 14 this week. And we see them steal a bid from a team. So at 7, I have Penn State. And do I think Penn State is a top 10 team in the country? I truly don't. But they can walk into the playoff right now at this point at 11-1. Like they have the Ohio State loss isn't pretty, but it's their only loss, and you're losing to a team that's going to be ranked second in the top 25. So like, there's nothing to truly hold against them except for the eye test. But Penn State is still getting the benefit of the doubt for that. And the thing about James Franklin, you look at the end of their schedule, it's 2 games that they should win. James Franklin doesn't lose games that Penn State should win. He doesn't win the games that they, are coin toss. That's the problem with James Franklin. But these games he does not lose.
So I kept Penn State at number 8. I think took care of business. Okay. To me, again, I kept Georgia there. It just seems a little harsh to drop them all the way out of the top 12 altogether. I guess no, Georgia will get in if like you can't drop them all. You can't drop them 11 spots in my opinion. So that's where I stopped the slide. And again, Penn State, you just mentioned it, like their resume all of a sudden isn't looking so sharp either. So look, I know you beat a Washington team that like is maybe bowling this season, maybe not. But to me, I think Penn State, they're firmly in. I just think it's like a pretty steady spot. And I'll just keep it going because I made Tennessee 9, same exact matchup as I had last week. And obviously Tennessee, room to move around this week going into the Georgia game. So my 8-9 stayed the same from last week between Penn State and Tennessee.
So I have Tennessee at 8. And basically all the things you said, like keeping them in the same range. There's nothing that we saw that against Mississippi State that's going to knock them from their spot. The Georgia game is going to be the one of consequence for Tennessee and 100%. Georgia, frankly. So, and then at 9, that's where I have Alabama. I have Alabama making the move up. Like I have them. So I'll go ahead and spoil mine. I have Notre Dame.
I still have Notre Dame. And I couldn't put them in.
I get it, and I do get it. I do think so. Let's unpack the Georgia case just a little bit more because I think the thing with Georgia that is making me think that they will be penalized is the optics of how their 2 losses looked. When you look at the Alabama game, yes, they came back and they almost won that game, but that first half is hard to erase from your memory when they were completely dominated for 30 minutes by Alabama. Then you look at this Ole Miss game where they couldn't do anything on offense. They got absolutely manhandled for 60 minutes on the offensive side of the ball. Carson Beck still doesn't look like the Carson Beck that we thought we were going to see, the Carson Beck we saw last year. And I think the eye test of that is going to penalize Georgia to the point where they are the first team out. Now, granted, there's a chance that Georgia beats Tennessee, and this is all a moot point because if Georgia beats Tennessee, I'm going to vault them back up to 8 or 9 in the rankings. But I think that game this week is very much like a play-in game, much like Alabama LSU was.
But, and as loyal listener Tempe Kids chimes in the chat, this is what my response to you is going to be. Georgia's dominance against Texas and Alabama's now resurgence is going to ultimately help them being Georgia at the end. If Texas is moving up to 2, all of a sudden Georgia has the best win on the board of any team because they would have beaten the number 2 team, and obviously Oregon is undefeated. So that's what keeps me there. And again, this is all fluid, but I just think losing on the road, I know it wasn't the prettiest effort, but I do think you need to still take a look at the full picture, and that Georgia did also go to Texas and won on the road. Just got to keep them in my opinion, at least for right now. And then to your mention of Alabama being the 9, I couldn't put Alabama above Tennessee And that's kind of how like this shook out for me and like where to put Alabama, because Tennessee beat Alabama. So I can't really get to Alabama with 2 losses going over Tennessee with 1 loss. I know Tennessee doesn't necessarily have the signature win, but that's where, as I was kind of messing around with where to put Alabama, I ultimately capped their ceiling behind Tennessee because Tennessee beat Alabama heads up. So I went 8 Penn State, 9 Tennessee, and then 10 Alabama. And you said you went 10 Tennessee?
No, 10 Notre Dame. I have Tennessee
got
at
it.
8. I have Alabama Tennessee rematch in the 8-9 game right now.
And then for me, where do you put Ole Miss in? Because Ole Miss now needs to get into the mix. I put them at 11. Again, similar type idea where this kind of just like it fell into place for me, the ordering of the SEC teams based on who beat who. Once I figured out, okay, I don't want to drop Georgia behind all these teams. I'm going to just keep them at the top. And then it kind of flowed in nicely for me where it's Tennessee over Alabama and Ole Miss. Yes, they have the win over Georgia, but they were out before. Like, how far can you really move them up? So Ole Miss is in, and I actually think there's room for them to continue kind of climbing up as other teams fall. Like, they kind of now have like a sturdy floor in here. So I just put them at 11, keep them there, and then like week over week, I kind of adjust them as they go into a bye week this week.
No, I also have Ole Miss at 11. And to your point about like reshuffling, I think that's where we kind of come down is what you think the committee is going to do with Georgia.
Yes.
Because like I tend to think that they're going to be a little harsher because, you mentioned the head-to-head matchups. I have a hard time having Georgia ahead of an Alabama and an Ole Miss team that beat them handily. So like that's just kind of, and like I understand the Texas loss or the Texas win and how dominant that was for Georgia. That's going to help them in the long run. I don't disagree with that. But I think right now, as we're reacting to what happened in week 11, I think it will penalize Georgia.
No, I think that's totally fair. And then 12, Boise State as the placeholder G5. Yeah. People are starting to talk about Boise maybe getting a top 4 seed. I don't see it. I don't. Yeah.
No. I have a hard time seeing it as well, especially like even if you're talking about Colorado taking BYU's spot in this, like I still think that if Colorado beats BYU, especially if BYU's 12-0 going into the Big 12 championship game, if they win their conference championship with that win, they're going to vault ahead of Boise State. They're not going to be like a lower ranked conference champion than the Broncos.
Yeah. And there is our updated Week 12 going into Week 12 college football playoff rankings. Cody, any other closing thoughts before we move on to previewing the Week 12 slate?
Yeah, I didn't outright mention this, but I think SMU is going to win the ACC.
Hopefully.
SMU has been the most impressive ACC team since Kevin Jennings took over. And like their one loss is to an undefeated BYU team, which was without Kevin Jennings at quarterback. And like, I just think the way things are trending, Miami's played with fire and they finally got burned. And I think it's just in their DNA to keep playing with fire. Like, I don't think that's going to stop. And if you play with fire against SMU, they'll beat the brakes off.
Yeah, I hope so. I have some SMU to win the ACC from before the season, so fingers crossed. Crossed there. Miami's secondary, it's been an issue. This team is bottom 5 in explosive pass defense, and SMU has that. First of all, that game is going to be a shootout back and forth. So yes, like I think either team can win. Miami will be favored, which is why like they're in. But I do one. Part of me thinks, yes, I agree with you. But another part of me is maybe this is the loss that kind of knocks some into shape, because I watched that entire Georgia Tech Miami game. And it was very clear that 10-minute drive that Georgia Tech had, who basically implemented a service academy script, that clearly like shook Miami. And it kind of took them out of a rhythm where the defense was on the field for a while. The offense kind of was a little out of sync. So I do think that maybe added to that. But again, like if they're going to get into a shootout with all these teams, it's going to be tough for them to close the door. And we saw where if you go 0 for 3 on 4th down, all of a sudden you're playing from behind and you're going to run out of time.
No, 100%. And like I said, going into the Georgia Tech game and going into this final stretch for Miami, like there's going to be a game where Cam Ward isn't Superman. And like, they've been saved by Cam Ward being Superman a lot this year. Like you look at the shootout they got into with Louisville where Cam Ward was just unbelievable in that game. And like, if Cam Ward's not unbelievable in that game, they could have lost to Louisville as well. You look at the Cal game and the heroics that Cam Ward put together there. Like the moment Cam Ward isn't just superhuman, this Miami team is vulnerable.
No, absolutely. And like I mentioned, the secondary is a big issue, and they were losing, but they lost Jadias Richard for a significant amount of time. It might be season ending, definitely several weeks, if not season ending. And players are dropping like flies for Miami during that game against Georgia Tech. I know that they're going into a bye, but that's something to monitor through the bye week and out of the bye week, is how healthy is Miami going to be on the defensive side of the ball, because we know the offense can cook, but it takes two. It takes two sides of the ball to tango. Yes. So Miami definitely one of the more shocking losses. We obviously still have them in the playoff, but it's far from a certainty anymore that Miami, with their first loss this season, is going to end up making it to the college football playoff. So before we preview Week 12, let's talk about our sponsor for today's show, and that's Underdog. Underdog is the best place to cash in on all your takes this football season. Which players are going off? Which ones are ice cold? Make your entries in just a few taps and turn your sports opinions into real money. Join over 5 million fans that are already playing on Underdog with their Champs game. You could win money by making entries with your favorite players. Underdog is the best place to play champions, so sign up and deposit now using promo code Stacking the Box to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. We're going to be talking about this game in a little bit, so I'll preview BYU Kansas late game on Saturday. Devin Neal, higher than 84.5 rushing yards, now the all-time leader in Kansas rushing yards in school history. Congrats to you, Devin Neal. Well, I think you're going to go higher than this number yet again. Facing a lackluster BYU rush defense, bottom half of the country, this Kansas offense has been humming. Neal went for over 100 yards last week. I think he's going to go higher than 84.5 this week. You could place that bet over on Underdog. If you're not a member, go sign up and use the promo code Stack in the Box. Get you $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. You can download the app and again use the promo code Stack in the Box. Get started today. You make the call over on Underdog. You must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama, Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, and President State where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. New York, call the 24/7 HOPE line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY at 467-369. Underdog Fantasy, use the promo code Stack in the Box. Get started today. Let's get some winners.
Beautifully done. Shouts to Devin Neal. Always shouts to Devin Neal. We love to see it.
Let's talk some Week 12. As Cody alluded to during the beginning of the show, we are now half game difference. For all intents and purposes, we are now at a tie. It hasn't been pretty, but we are tied here. We'll see if one of us could catch a heater before the end of the season. And then, of course, we'll have our little bowl bonanza and everything like that. But all square here. 3 weeks left in the regular season. So about 15 picks to separate myself and Cody. So, Cody, overall slate, I feel like the last few weeks have had, if not like the best games, a lot of games of consequence. I feel like for like a month now, there have been like 3 games where we're in like our pre-production meeting and we're like, we got to talk about this game. We got to talk about this game. Yeah. This week, it did not really feel like that. It feels like a lot of the projected high leverage games have kind of lost its luster a little bit.
No, 100%. Like a couple weeks ago, the Clemson-Pitt game looked like it was going to be a very consequential matchup. Now, not so much. It's only really consequential for Clemson. Like Clemson is still alive in the ACC race if Miami were to drop another. So you definitely can't lose to Pitt if you want that to be the case. But like, I do think that we are like, you lost. There's some games like that lost some luster.
It just obviously Tennessee, Georgia, which is what we're going to start with, is obviously the biggest game on the board. But just SEC, you got a few cupcake matchups. You got ACC, like you mentioned, Clemson, Pitt. Big 12, there's always games of consequence. Every game is high leverage now because every team is the same. And then Big 10, not really. Like Wisconsin just isn't really coming together. So Oregon, maybe they're challenged, but it's not as like much of an exciting game. Penn State and Ohio State, 2 teams in big favorite situations. Indiana on a bye. So just a lot of the teams that you thought maybe even a few weeks ago, like, oh, like maybe this is like a big weekend. Not really. It's kind of lost its shine. So let's start, before we talk about Tennessee, Georgia, let's start on the weeknight, because we have a handful of games starting with Maction tonight on Tuesday. We have 3, 6, 7. We have 11 games before we even get to Saturday. So, Cody, where are you looking on the board, one of the weeknight games, to get our pick segment started?
Just in my nature, I'm going to the absolute grossest weeknight game, which is Kent State, Miami, Ohio, and I'm taking the under 45.5. I'm going to have 2 Sickos picks this week because this is definitely qualifying in there. Look, Kent State's terrible. There's no doubt about that. Worst team in the country, and they're a 30-point dog in this game. I wanted to actually take the Kent State team total under, but there was a lot of juice. I think it was like minus 150.
What is it,
juice.
like
so
7.5?
I wasn't going to 7.5, yeah. So like I love that, but like at minus 150 juice, I'm not going to, cheat my way into a win on this show. But I do like the full game under because, again, I don't think Kent State's scoring in this one. Miami, Ohio's defense is fine, particularly for a MAC team. They're pretty good in terms of MAC defenses. Kent State's on their 4th quarterback that they played this year. It's not great. Rule Tomlinson he was 8 of 18 for 116 yards and a pick last week. So, I just don't think this offense is going to be able to function, quite frankly. Most importantly, though, I don't think Miami, Ohio has it really in their DNA to run this up too high on their own. They rank 125th in the country in plays run per game. So they're a very slow-paced team. I think it's methodical. And I think that they're going to get up early and just going to be able to coast to a win. I mean, Kent State's defense, they could make this hairy, but I do think that Miami, Ohio runs slow enough to get us under 45.
The 4th stringer for Kent State is probably the worst quarterback I've watched in college football this year.
It's abysmal. Dude.
As someone who bet the over in Kent State, Ohio last week, and nobody decided to say that their 3rd stringer, Tommy Ulatowski, he's actually not terrible. He's able to hit a few explosives. So that was a pretty annoying way to start the game. And it still almost went over because Ohio had 2 special teams touchdowns. But Kent State can't move the ball if it's not Ulatowski. So that's worth monitoring. But Miami, team that wants to lean on their defense anyway, I don't hate the underlook here, to be honest with you. For me, I'm going to go with, I think at the end of the season, as we're getting here, it's baked into the number at times, but I do think that teams that are potentially trending up and maybe angling bowl eligibility versus teams that are trending down and potentially falling out of it, whether it's a coach that has kind of lost the locker room, a team that's maybe out of bowl eligibility, something like that. And I think you have a really good setup here for Houston on Friday night in Tucson. I'll take the 1.5, but give me Houston plus 1.5 against Arizona. I think that they're going to win this game outright. Arizona 3-6 on the year, 1-8 against the number. So market hasn't been able to catch up with how bad this team has been under Brent Brennan. Houston, let's just take a zoom out with them. Since going to Zion Chris about a month or so ago, they have a double-digit outright upset at TCU. Chris got hurt against Kansas, and they got dump trucked, but that loss is kind of aging pretty nicely if you look at how Kansas are playing.
Yeah.
Then they beat Utah at home, and then they beat Kansas State at home, where Chris came back from injury those 2 games. So, to me, this Houston team is trending up. They can lead on their ground game against an Arizona team that is outside the top 90 in EPA per rush. So I like Houston here. The defense should be able to get after Fafita, who can't stop making poor decisions. Houston's top 50 in havoc rate. Give me the better team. Give me the better team. Yeah. What home field advantages are going to be with this one? Both teams off a bye, so it's not like there's like a situational edge here or anything. I think Arizona's dead in the water. Houston need to go 2-1 to get bowl eligibility. First-year head coach Willie Fritz. I think this team has been going up. And first-year head coach Brent Brennan, Arizona, this team has been going down. So I like Houston plus 1.5.
I'm right there with you on this one. I like Houston outright in this one. I think, frankly, at this point in the season, they are the better football team. And I don't think there's a whole lot of questioning.
Yeah. And also, again, you look at Arizona's last game. They got, 52-13 or something like that against UCF. It was a lot to a little. So I could also see if Houston's able to get up I don't see like a second half comeback here. I could see Houston kind of sitting on this one, suffocating Arizona and pulling ahead. And if not, I could see
100%.
them also coming from behind. So I just think that there's avenues to getting this one home. Let's talk the biggest game on the slate Saturday night in Athens. Tennessee goes to Sanford Stadium to take on Georgia. Lot of factors going on to this one that we're going to talk about, Cody, but you have Nico Iamaleava, who I thought was making some serious strides. He leaves in the first half against Mississippi State. Josh Heupel says he's good. We'll see. He didn't come out of the locker room at halftime, so we didn't get like a firm update on Nico. You hope he's okay. If not, it will be freshman Gaston Moore. Dylan Sampson left with an injury. He returned, though, so a little bit more confident that he'll be okay. But where you at with this one? Georgia off another shaky offensive performance behind Carson Beck. Tennessee now with injury concerns. Where you landing here?
I'm landing on the under, and I think that I got a little cute last week with Georgia Ole Miss trying to do the Ole Miss team total. Got burned by that late Georgia turnover that set up the late Ole Miss field goal to get over 26.5. But so I'm just going full game under for this one. I think that regardless of the Tennessee injuries, I don't care if Nico plays. I don't care if Dylan Sampson's 100%. I think that the defenses rule the day on this one. And I think that specifically the Tennessee defense is going to have a lot of success on this one. This interior of the Georgia offensive line is banged up and playing really crappily, quite frankly. And like you're now going up against the Tennessee front that ranks 8th in run defense grade and 11th in pass rush grade, according to PFF this year. I think the Tennessee defensive line controls this game much like Ole Miss was able to do last week. I understand this is in Athens, and for Tennessee, Athens has been a house of horrors. And I think that's where we see the Georgia defense really kind of thrive a little bit in this one. And I think that Georgia's defense, I still believe in their ceiling. I just think they're a lot more volatile than we probably realize. There's not a consistency level that we're used to seeing from a Georgia defense. But I do think in Athens against rival Tennessee with basically their playoff livelihood on the line, I think we see the defense show up. I think Tennessee's defense does the same. And I think this sails under. I think this game could be played in the 30s.
Yeah,
honestly.
I joined you on the under. Let's talk Josh Heupel against Kirby Smart. He, in 3 games against Georgia, Tennessee has scored 17, 13, and 10. Mm-hmm. On the other side, so I do think that maybe this veer and shoot offense does not necessarily work against Georgia's defense, even if Georgia's defense maybe isn't as dominant as it has been in recent years. But maybe it's just a schematic edge that Tennessee doesn't have, or that Georgia has over Tennessee. And at the same time, you have some quarterback health concerns. I think we've seen Tennessee really lean into the run. How about this? Both teams are outside the top 80 in explosive pass rate. So neither team are really hitting the big plays here. So I do think that this is more of a field position, lean on the run game, try to avoid that big mistake. And I agree with you. I mean, I make this total way lower. I think that, it's kind of a race to 21, 23, something like that, where look, it's a low total, and again, there's talent on the field, but we've seen Georgia able to shut down Tennessee. And like you mentioned, with Tennessee's defensive line can have a similar day like Ole Miss. Is Georgia really taking the top off this Tennessee defense? Because I think there's concerns about Tennessee secondary still, but this Georgia team doesn't have winners on the outside. Carson Beck hasn't made a big-time throw, according to Pro Football Focus, since the Mississippi State game. And he's made 7 turnover-worthy plays in that time. So, I don't know. And I mentioned this to you last week. I don't think the game script is going to call for a lot of Carson Beck throws downfield. And I actually think when they came at that first drive at a halftime for Georgia, Beck made some good throws. Honestly, his receivers did him no favors last week. There were some plays, like one hit Ben Urosek right in the face throw. So maybe it was the weather, but I just don't think that Georgia is going to be chucking it around the yard here with Beck's suspect decision-making. I think they're going to try and play conservative and lean on their defense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's what Kirby Smart wants to do. God knows that's what Mike Bobo is going to do, because he's Mike freaking Bobo, who, good job, Kirby, hiring your friend. But, I do think that, let me ask you this. How concerned are you about the Nico injury? Because to me, I can at least rationalize, and I'm not sure how much I believe this, but I can at least rationalize the idea of you're playing Mississippi State. The game isn't out of reach for Mississippi State at halftime necessarily, but you do have the game in control. You know the Georgia game is coming up. You know that's the one that you have to win. Is there any credence to the idea of just keeping Nico in a box if he is a little dinged?
I think he plays. I don't know if he's 100%.
Okay. I think that's
which is probably best for under. I'd rather not go to the backup because then that's like more variance and you don't really know how that could go. Whether it's whether it's setting
up for like defensive scores.
Whether it's like defensive scores or the backup just kind of has a day, no game tape or anything. You know what I mean? Like he just goes, I doubt it, but like there's more variables. So I'd rather almost a not 100% Nico. I think he plays though, but kind of some weird Josh Heupel quotes like the whole time. So I don't know. Definitely something to monitor throughout the week.
Josh Heupel doesn't do normal quotes. Let's be honest.
That's also true. So we move through the rest of our card, and we want to talk about, again, this undefeated BYU team. Survived the Holy War against Utah. They're back at home to face a surging Kansas team. Devin Neal higher than 84.5 rushing yards over at Underdog Fantasy. Use the promo code Stack in the Box. Let me ask you this before we talk about the game. Do you think Utah really got screwed?
A little bit. It wasn't a full-blown hosing, but like it was that call at that moment in that situation of the game. That's a tough
call. Didn't
he?
But wasn't it just a hold? I get it. It's sticky, but he did hold them. It wasn't like a phantom hold.
Correct. That's why I'm saying it's not like a complete hosing because by the letter of the law, it's the right call. But situation dependent, which we know that a lot of these refs do take into account. That might be a spot where you just let them play a little bit.
I don't know if I necessarily agree with the AD going. I know it's a crazy emotional game.
No,
it wasn't that egregious.
Yeah. No, it wasn't we're not talking about the Saints Rams non-pass interference call. We're not talking about a situation.
Yeah, it wasn't like a life. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. So anyway, BYU still undefeated. They escape Utah. Kansas now on a bit of a run here where they're blowing teams out. They nearly beat Kansas State on the road. Completely outclassed Iowa State. Night game BYU. We know this place is going to be rocking with everyone on their Diet Cokes. BYU is a 3-point favorite, total of 55.5. Are you buying the surging Jayhawks or are you siding with what might be this year's team of destiny?
I am siding with the Jayhawks. So the widely spread line is BYU -2.5. If you go to DraftKings Sportsbook, there is Kansas +3 out there, which I will take the full field goal there, thankfully. Fun stat for you. Lance Leipold at Kansas has covered as an underdog against the last 4 ranked opponents that he's faced. He gets these Kansas teams up for these big games, for these big spots. And when the way Kansas is trending, I like that even more because Kansas is looking like the Kansas team that we frankly thought we were going to see for the entire season. And I think one of the things that stands out, you already mentioned it talking about Devin Neal. This BYU rush defense can be had. And Kansas has been running the ball really effectively with Devin Neal, with Daniels using his legs. And I think that they're going to still, and with Henshaw mixed in there as well. So I think Kansas is going to be able to run the ball. You look at this BYU defense, and I think that they are a little overinflated based on their level of competition. If Kevin Jennings plays in that SMU game, I think that game is a lot different than the 18-15 final score that we saw. And so you look at BYU, they're ranked 21st in total explosive plays allowed, plays over 20-plus yards this season. I think that Kansas is the exact type of team that can exploit that and make that number, frankly, irrelevant because you look at what they did against Iowa State and what this offense was able to do. Iowa State actually ranks better in total explosive plays allowed. They rank 16th in the country in total explosive plays allowed. And Kansas averaged 24.6 yards per reception in that game against Iowa State. And they set it up with the run game. They were consistently getting 5-6 yards a carry. You have to respect the run, and that sets up the Kansas deep ball to be able to make those big plays. I think you can run the same script against the way this BYU defense sets up. Now, on the flip side of this, BYU is going to score in this game. Kansas' defense is still not that good. And so I do think BYU still scores, but I think this is another game where it's a shootout. So if I'm going to get the full field goal, I'm going to take the underdog, especially with there's no real pressure on Kansas in this game. Kansas is fighting for bowl eligibility. Sure, they're still not out of a bowl game, but at the same time, they're not playing for a Big 12 title. They're playing as a chaos agent at this point. BYU is playing for everything at this point. And so I do wonder if we get a little bit of lemon booty from BYU, because I do think teams that have not been in this situation before, I think you're pretty susceptible to
that. I think your notes on what BYU secondary against Kansas and their passing game and their ability to chuck it around the field is well noted. And it's why I ended up on the over. Not going to be a ton. Yeah. It's going to be a slow game in terms of like the snaps and everything. Both teams play pretty slow.
Yeah.
But I think both offenses can move the ball pretty efficiently here. And it's not going overlooked in this one that I think both Retzlaff and Daniels could be in for a few whoopsies in this one. I mean, Jalen Daniels he's gotten better as the year's gone on, but this guy definitely puts the ball in harm's way. And we started to see Jake Retzlaff against Utah. You saw some of those turnover-worthy plays start to really bubble up here. So I think you could see a few short fields. I think you could see hyper-efficient play from both offenses. I think Neal getting a healthy Highshaw back. I think run the ball to set up those deep shots for Jalen Daniels 100%. I think BYU can do similar. I think they're going to be able to get theirs at home. Kansas defense has definitely raised its level in terms of havoc. They're top 50 in havoc rate, and the secondary is their strong point. So I do think you could see maybe a few turnovers in this one, and the game kind of gets a little loose. So I went for the over. Yeah. I totally agree with you. I think I like taking the points with Kansas, but I think you're just going to see something where both teams get into the high 20s. I think you see a lot of scores in this one. Again, maybe some short fields. And yeah, I think Kansas wins this one on the road in a high-scoring game.
Yeah, I think we see the game the exact same way then, because I do think Kansas is able to clip them. I would probably, take a little gander at the Kansas money line, frankly. But I think that isn't a game. Like, you look at the Iowa State game, the total ended up in the 80s. And I think BYU's offense has a lot higher ceiling than Iowa State's, frankly. So you look at this and I think Kansas is going to be able to score. I think BYU is going to be able to score, but I think Kansas has the makeup to kind of close the gap.
Yeah, both teams have some high ceiling, and Kansas is definitely balling right now on the offensive side of the ball. As Tempe Kid says, BYU money line with the side smirk emoji. So we'll see. We're up against it with Tempe Kids, Cody. How we see BYU Kansas. Now to there's, like we were saying, there's no real signature ACC or Big Ten game. So we kind of left this one up for debate. So any ACC or Big Ten game you want to take, Cody, your call.
Yeah, so of course, because it is honestly not the best slate of Big Ten and ACC games, I got a little in the weeds. I'm going Oregon first half -7.5 against Wisconsin on the road at Camp Randall. For starters, Oregon has covered this number in the first half in 8 of their 10 games. The 2 games that they did not in the first half were Ohio State and Boise State. And I'm sorry to tell you this, Reed, but your alma mater, they're not Oregon.
No,
they're
not very
Boise
good.
State. We're not very good. So then you look at the matchup. I think that there's a chance that Wisconsin, or at least early, could keep Dylan Gabriel in somewhat of a box. But more importantly, I think there's a chance that Will Stein keeps Dylan Gabriel in a little bit of a box early in this game, because Wisconsin's run defense, they're 97th in defensive success rate against the run this season, and they rank 84th nationally in runs of 10-plus yards allowed so far this season. I think that we see the Oregon backfield really have a big game. Doesn't matter whoever, whether it's James Whitney, I don't care. Just hand the ball off, and I think you're going to be able to move the chains pretty consistently. On the flip side of that, I love this Oregon defense. I think this Oregon defense is really coming into its own as we get deeper into the year. This Badgers offense, I don't think is inept, but one of the areas where they really struggle, they're 94th in early down EPA per play. And I think if you get Braden Locke against this Oregon front and this Oregon secondary in 3rd and long situations, it's not going to work out really well for Wisconsin. So I think that Oregon also, this is their 11th game of the season. They go into a bye and then they finish the season with Washington. I think they want to get ahead early, cruise control through the second half, and then go into the bye, get as healthy as possible. So I'm really targeting Oregon to come out and jump out to a big lead in the first half. I think 7.5 is frankly a little disrespectful to the Ducks. I think they probably are up by 2 scores at least going into the halftime.
Yeah, Oregon, and that late bye was why I liked Oregon preseason to win the Big Ten, because I think they're going to be well rested for that potential Big Ten championship game against likely Ohio State. So good nugget there on maybe the state of where Oregon's going to be at. As Tempe Kid says, Wisconsin only shows up against the old Big Ten teams. They don't show up for big games. As a Wisconsin graduate, they've shown up. They just haven't been able to. Honestly, they've shown up. They haven't been able to close games out. they've been in a lot of these games. And they just can't get over the hump. So maybe they've actually been pretty decent in the first half in some of these big games. So we'll see. For me, I stuck in the Big Ten as well. I took Michigan State +3 against Illinois. Both teams off a bye. I don't trust Illinois as much as a favorite. Both trenches are just absolutely gutted. They're outside the top 120 in both offensive and defensive line yards. And I think with Aiden Childs good to go, he left the prior game ahead of their bye against Indiana with an injury. With Jonathan Smith as a head coach, this is the prime setup for him as a running dog here, where he could kind of implement what he wants to do. Also, we're kind of talking about bowl eligibility and stuff. Illinois already at 6 wins. Sparty needs to go 2-1 down the stretch to get to bowl eligibility. I just think catching a field goal against an Illinois team that I'm not sure they're going to be able to close the door out or close the door on Sparty. I took the 3 here with Miss State. I think these two teams are pretty close to equal. And honestly, in terms of expectation, Michigan State has showed up a little bit better as a dog in this expectation than Illinois has as a favorite all season long.
No, I like that. Illinois as a favorite right now just doesn't feel indicative of what the state of this roster, frankly. This was not a deep roster. I liked Illinois a lot early in the season, but as, like you said, the trenches have started to get gutted with injuries and other things. We're starting to see the attrition really take its toll in the Illini, whereas you said Michigan State got Aiden Childs to go into the bye, get a little bit healthier. And I think Michigan State is definitely a live dog here.
Upset pick, speaking of live dogs, you're sticking in the Big Ten. Where are you going, Cody?
I'm going to Los Angeles because why the hell is USC favored against any football team? Now, granted, it is against Nebraska, who I'm taking at +270 on the money line, who I don't trust either. But I certainly don't trust USC as nearly a 10-point favorite in this game. I do not understand what you've seen from USC to this point that would make you believe that. I understand they're making the quarterback switch to Maeva. I don't care, quite frankly, because this USC offensive line is horrendous. In Nebraska, for all of their faults, they can still rush the passer. They're 21st in PFF pass rush grade, and USC's offensive line is 114th in pass blocking grade. Now you're bringing a quarterback who, yes, has experience at the college level, but not at this level, not against these athletes that he's going to see from Nebraska coming after him. On the flip side of that, I still don't have faith in this USC defensive front to consistently generate pressure, to consistently get push against the run. And my worries about Nebraska's offense come against teams that can get into the backfield and pressure Raiola, because I think Raiola's decision-making just plummets whenever he has pressure in his face. I don't think USC is going to be able to do that consistently in this game. Maybe 270 on the money line is a bit aggressive to go after Nebraska, a team that has not looked good. But coming off of the bye with a need for bowl eligibility against a USC team that has not shown us a reason to have faith in them for a long time, I'm willing to take the gamble and see what Nebraska can do.
Daniel Holgerson also calling the plays this week. So
we ride for the ball.
We'll see if Nebraska picks it up on the offensive side of the ball. For me, a bit of a random one, but this number is just way too high. I took Troy +250, against Georgia Southern. This Georgia Southern team is luck box central. 2 double-digit fourth quarter comebacks over the last month. So this team is high variance, and you'll think I'm kidding, but Troy's third-string quarterback has unlocked this offense. You go through his 2 full starts. Matthew Caldwell, this beautiful, beautiful Matthew Caldwell, near win at Arkansas State. They lose 34-31, high scoring there, got the ball moving there. And they beat Coastal senseless ahead of their bye week, plus 196 in terms of yards per play here. If you just stack these twos up, like cover the records up, just look at their numbers. Troy's better on a net yards per play basis than Georgia Southern. Both teams out of a bye. I know Georgia Southern has the gaudy record and like is somewhat in the Sun Belt picture here, but this is way too many points for a Southern team that is high volatility, and a Troy team that is trending up going into the close of the season. You flip 2 of those results where if Marshall doesn't fumble it like twice in the last 4 minutes, and if South Alabama doesn't fumble a kickoff with a lead in the 4th quarter at home, this Georgia Southern team is probably not going bowling, and they're probably a 4.5-point favorite against Troy. So I think Troy's trending up going into the close with this quarterback, and I think they can run the ball at will here against Georgia Southern. So I will take the Trojans to win the game on the field.
Honestly, I'm at the point with the Sun Belt where I'm just about to sprinkle on every underdog money line because I don't trust any team in this Sun Belt, quite frankly.
I guess like Louisiana is the only team you could trust, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, every team but the Raging Cajuns. I apologize. No disrespect.
They dump trucked Arkansas State last week as Tempe Kid chimes in. He might be on to our Sickos pick a little early, but he said you can blindly bet on UAB game over on UAB games and be profitable. Love the over 62 at Memphis. Tempe Kids, if you were listening last year, I was basically exclusively giving out UAB overs in our Sickos pick. So good segue into that. Cody, where are you looking with this week's Sickos pick?
Yeah, you thought Miami Kent State under was sick. I'm taking Sam Houston laying the 14.5 against Kennesaw State on the road. Frankly, this started as just a pure vibes pick because what the hell is Kennesaw State doing firing Brian Bohannon? We've seen the FCS to FBS transition take time for every one of these programs, Sam Houston being one of them. They were awful last year, and now they're 7-2 and in line to win the CUSA. So, like, you look at this, and it doesn't make any sense. And Bohannon, like, basically found it and raised this college football program to where they can make the jump to FBS. Do you not think this is a team that's going to be on quit watch? Because I cannot comprehend why they let him go. I think there's a real chance that we see the Owls just mail in the rest of the season. I mean, they're already 1-8, but they have been competitive. Like, they were in a shootout with a bad UTEP team and lost in overtime last week. They beat Liberty. That's their 1 win on the season. So, like, we've seen them be frisky. I think that friskiness goes away when you take Bohannon out of the equation. On the flip side of that, my one worry is this is a big number for Sam Houston, an offense that has been held in check up quite frequently. Kennesaw State's defense ranks out of the top 110 in terms of EPA allowed per rush and EPA allowed per dropback. So I'm not like terribly worried about them being able to put the clamps on the Bearcats with the K. But also Sam Houston, their offense has been volatile, and against some of the worst defenses they played, we've seen them actually put up a pretty decent number. They put up 41 on Utah. They put up 40 against Texas State. They put up 31 on New Mexico State. They put up 34 against Rice. So, like, it's not a team that's incapable of scoring, and I think Kennesaw State might not score a whole lot because, again, I think there's quit watch situation here.
No, I don't mind that at all with the state of Kennesaw State. I went for San Diego State UNLV over 54. UNLV kind of let in like anybody score on them this season. You just go through the results, especially since the start of conference play. I mean, they shut down Fresno State. That feels like a while ago, but 14 points. Fresno State was super banged up, if you remember that game correctly. Since then, so we're now, since the start of October, they've allowed 44 points to Syracuse, 34 to Utah State, 25 to Oregon State, 29 to Boise State, 27 to Hawaii. They're playing a San Diego State team that plays at one of the fastest tempos in the country. So at the very least, I think we're going to get a lot of cracks at scoring here. And on the other side, UNLV can probably name their number against one of the worst defenses in the country. This UNLV offense continues to look the part, and San Diego State, especially against the run, is going to struggle big time. UNLV, top 15 in EPA per rush. San Diego State, bottom 10 in EPA per rush allowed. So while UNLV doesn't play at a super fast tempo, they're going to be explosives everywhere, and we've seen their games get super pointsy. And I think San Diego State's a willing dance partner. I think a little bit of a misleading 21-16 final against New Mexico. I think San Diego State if they get to 20, I feel really good about this one. But even if they can get to like 17 range, I think UNLV could definitely break, into the high 30s, 40s here. So I like this over 54.
No, I love this as well. And as Tim P. Kid says in the chat, like the San Diego State offense is picking it up. But on top of that, even if the UNLV defense does come up with stops, you mentioned the explosive plays that UNLV can just get hot with, quite frankly. And with the pace that the Aztecs play at, if the San Diego State offense does not take advantage of a UNL defense at times, that's just more opportunities for explosives for UNLV, quite frankly.
All right, great show, great stuff. Love the bracket we came up with. Can't wait to run that back with you next week, Cody. Why don't you recap your picks, and then I'll recap my picks, and then we'll get out of here.
All righty. So weeknight, tomorrow night, Wednesday, we got Kent State, Miami, Ohio, under 45.5. Just hold your nose and bet it. Tennessee, Georgia, I like the under 48.5. Kansas, BYU, give me Kansas +3. ACC and Big Ten games, I like the Oregon first half -7.5 against Wisconsin. Upset pick, give me Nebraska +270 on the money line. Surely won't regret that against USC. And then Sickos pick, Sam Houston -14.5 at Kennesaw State.
There we go. And then for me, I took Houston +1.5 on the weeknight games. Joined Cody with the under 48.5 in Tennessee, Georgia. Took the over 55.5 in Kansas, BYU. Michigan State +3 versus Illinois. My upset pick is Troy on the money line +250 against Georgia Southern. And then I took the over 54 in San Diego State, UNLV. Cody, great show. Thank you all for listening. Make sure to sign up with Underdog Fantasy using the promo code Stack in the Box. We'll be back same time next week. Getting you ready for week 13 in college football. Enjoy the games, enjoy the chaos, and we'll see you next week.
We'll see you.